Hey, everybody. It's a word from one of our favorite sponsors, Sunset Lake Sebede.com. Use code LEFT is best and you get 20% off all their amazing products. You can get the Sebede with the melatonin for nighttime. You can get it with the Sebede for the day, I believe. I literally have their lotion right here, which is great in the winter months. I have it just right here on my desk, and then at home, right by my bedside table, I have their Sebede to get me to sleep. So I am a daily user of this product. As we always tell you, Sunset Lake uses regenerative farming practices. They have supported things like refugee resettlement and Planned Parenthood, along with the Majority Report, fundraising on behalf of those causes. They're both a company that you can feel good about supporting and also a company that gives you high quality products, not the crap that you're going to get off the side of the road or whatever. This is actually tested, third-party tested, and the kind of product that we're happy to get behind. So,
and I'm not sure if it just comes to us, but they have a bunch of printouts of that testing too, if you want to get really wonky.
Yeah, that's true. So they're very transparent as well. So sunsetlakesebede.com, use code LEFT is best for 20% off. Again, that's sunsetlakesebede.com, use code LEFT is best for 20% off. And now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, December 12th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Michelle S. Phelps, author of Minneapolis Reckoning, Race, Violence, and the Politics of Policing in America. And later in the show, Gabriel Hetland will be talking with us about public renewables and how they can beat Trumpism. Also on the program today, Biden finally does something. Yesterday, he pardoned and commuted more sentences than any president in a single day, all for nonviolent crimes. 34 Democratic members of Congress asked Biden to pardon environmental lawyer Stephen Donziger. They should also look into Leonard Peltier while they're at it. AOC's bid to be the top Democrat on oversight looks more promising every day. This is an improvement. Not seniority, but the better communicators are maybe winning this kind of thing. Facebook, aka Meta, donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. Looks like big tech is in bed with Big Con. Nobody? All right. John Fetterman begins his Joe Manchin pivot. They're blending together in my mind at this point. Fetterman backed Trump's cabinet pick, Elise Stefanik, for the UN, obviously, and joined Truth Social. So that's where he's at. Speaking of Joe Manchin, yesterday he and Sinema, on their way out the door, killed Biden's NLRB pick, handing Trump the board instead of cementing Democratic control for 2 more years. So Trump scraps an ICE rule preventing agents from arresting migrants in churches, schools, and hospitals. House Republicans passed the annual National Defense Authorization Act, which includes things for our defense that are so important, like restrictions on trans care for kids. After their merger lost in court, Albertsons is suing Kroger for billions in damages for not securing regulatory approval on the same day they authorized billions in stock buybacks. They must be really hurting.
Just trying to figure out how to best get that butter on the shelf.
The New York Times reaches a deal with its tech workers after a 2-year fight with the Guild. The LA City Council voted for a $30 an hour minimum wage for hotel and airport workers. And lastly, the UK under Labour has just indefinitely banned puberty blockers for trans kids. I'm not sure what the mechanisms were with this Cass report thing over there, but that's shameful that that's allowed to happen right now. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. I am Emma. I am here with Matt. I am here with Bradley.
Yo.
And Sam will be back next week, but we're holding it down this week. Spoke earlier, you'll hear that conversation in just a second. Spoke to her this morning, Michelle S. Phelps, on her book, The Minneapolis Reckoning, Race, Violence, and the Politics of Policing in America. I thought it was a really, really good conversation with the complexities of policing, crime, reflecting on our past, really 4 years, and prior to that, how things have changed in the conversation around policing and how Minneapolis was so central in that conversation. But first, let's go here. So we've been covering, as has basically everyone in media, with bated breath, this killing of the United Healthcare CEO by Luigi Mangione, who has been in, at least that's what's been alleged.
Alleged.
He has a manifesto. We will see.
I'll say if I was on the jury, I have not seen enough evidence to convict, so it's alleged.
Yep, still alleged. People can Google jury nullification if they wish.
Just unrelatedly.
And the reaction that it sparked has been completely understandable, frankly, but also hopefully clarifying for people in our politics. Or
challenging for the people that control our politics.
Yeah. And so that's why hearing this rhetoric from Elizabeth Warren on Joy Reid's show yesterday is encouraging. And, you know, Warren struggles, I think, as a retail politician, but I don't think we would have had Lena Khan as the head of the FTC without Warren's influence on Biden. So I think she has a lot of sway behind the scenes, and that's really where her strength lies, and in things like consumer protection. And so she fundamentally understands through her work prior to being in the Senate and in the Senate how these giant corporations rip people off. And this is what she had to say to Joy Reid on MSNBC yesterday.
A lot about this Luigi Mangione, the case about the United Healthcare CEO. People are very angry at United Healthcare, I think for good reason, denying care, and the whole system. And we were just talking about the previous block, killing a CEO is not the way you change. You have to regulate them, right? And so we've got attempts to try to rein in some of these big businesses. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was your creation. The Trump administration wants to get rid of it. That is like protecting people from credit card fraud. Yeah. What happens if that goes away?
So look, terrible for individuals, but stop and think overall about the social contract. Part of the deal in how we've kept this democracy, this economy, this country on a fairly steady path for more than 200 years has been that those at the top pay a little more in taxes, are a little less rich than they otherwise might be, and everybody else at least gets a chance. Yeah. And what happens when you turn this into the billionaires run it all is they get the opportunity to squeeze every last penny. Yeah. And look, we'll say it over and over. Violence is never the answer. This guy gets a trial who's allegedly killed the CEO of United Health. But you can only push people so far. And then they start to take matters into their own hands. Yeah. We need regulation in part to rein those guys in. And you know where this is coming big time ahead of us is on taxes. Yeah. That the big boys, just like you said, their plan is to rush through this tax plan right at the beginning of 2025, give themselves a bunch more tax breaks, and then put the real burden of running this country on ordinary, hard-working
that will pay the tariff. That will pay the tariff. They're going to pay, and it's paying at the bottom.
They can pay for it in taxes.
Absolutely.
But the whole point is shove the cost somewhere else
onto the poor people and make them subsidize the rich.
One more way for billionaires to pick the pockets.
One of the billion.
Yeah, I think that was good. And
This is physics. You can only push people so far, and there is going to be a snow job attempted by a lot of people in media. Thankfully, Joy Reid there asking the proper question. But there's going to be a snow job to act as if that's not the case. That people, that the crabs and lobsters aren't boiling to the extent they are. They are.
They are, and you can, as I mentioned, I'm far less interested in Mangione in particular, even though the more that comes out about the story and the pain that he was in, it's hard not to feel just immense sadness for his situation. And you start to think about how many Americans have been in similar situations, what chronic pain is like, and how you can deal with it in a society that privatizes the care that you would need to alleviate said pain.
And what future violence are we actually concerned about? Is it assassinations of CEOs, or is it the everyday violence of this private healthcare system that exists for no other reason other than to be parasitical and gather profits?
Right.
Which violence are we upset about? You can't be equally concerned about both, because that's actually offensive in and of itself.
And as we covered yesterday, when people are defensive of the healthcare CEO but are cheering on the death of Jordan Neely, that betrays everything. And it doesn't even need to be that. Perhaps they won't cheer it on, but they'll still lament this death. You're making it quite clear that you don't fundamentally understand how precarious it is to exist in America today. And
you're okay with it.
Or you're okay with it. Every person, that regular person that you talk to, will have a nightmare story about dealing with a health insurance company. And so Warren, Bernie, other leaders in the Democratic Party, and then frankly, the House, like Democrats in the House, I'm excited that it looks like AOC is going to be the top ranking member on oversight, which means that she can call witnesses if the Democrats take back the House. If she ends up getting that position, she can be a vocal megaphone in challenging Republicans and like fraudsters like this, communicating these issues from an economic populist, in the truest sense, perspective to the American public. That's the way that we can, I think, build the party back in a better way, having more of those folks in leadership positions as opposed to deferring to seniority, as the Democrats have done basically my entire lifetime, to disastrous consequences, whether it be the Supreme Court and Ruth Bader Ginsburg hanging on, or whether it be Joe Biden hanging on and handing us a Trump presidency once again. Time for new blood, and leadership where these ideas are put to the fore. Folks, a word from one of our favorite sponsors, Henson Shaving. If you were born after 1970, there is a very good chance that your first razor was a multi-blade razor. These razors have been the status quo for over a century, but where has that gotten us? According to a recent study, 2/3 of men expect some irritation when they shave. There is virtually no information on how to prevent irritation, only how to treat it, which means probably buying another product from one of these companies that's selling you these multi-blade razors. Over 2 billion plastic razors enter the landfills of the United States each year alone. The razor blade model leads to high operating costs. More and more people are opting to either stop shaving or explore more invasive hair removal methods. This is why Henson Shaving wants to change the shaving industry, not through gimmicks like subscriptions or moisturizing strips, but through groundbreaking research. Even the cheapest dollar store disposable razor will likely give you a reasonably smooth shave. The trick is removing the hair without any negative outcomes to your skin. Henson wants to change that paradigm away from getting a smooth shave to getting a skin-friendly shave.
I can tell you, I didn't shave this morning, but I shaved yesterday using my Henson razor. Using the old system, it's done. It's like, cathode ray tube TVs. Like I'm never going to use anything besides my Henson razor with the replaceable razor blades that cut better and aren't as expensive.
And it's
crazy.
I'm almost like afraid that I want Henson to have business, but I'm afraid that more people are going to pick up on this because I got it from my fiance.
It's so good that maybe in the future the one world government could take over Henson shaving. That's sort of the public option.
A public option for shaving. It really is. It's amazing. Like if you buy one of their razors and then you get the
big
blades.
Stack of razor blades.
Right. The Henson razor works with standard dual edge blades that cost less than 10 cents each. Once you own the Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 a year to replace the blades. The razor itself is made of aluminum and there is no plastic in their packaging either. Henson makes razors in their aerospace machine shop in Canada that also made parts for the Mars rover and International Space Station. Henson's machinists are exceptional at manufacturing, and the level of precision is one of the big reasons the razor is so much gentler on your skin. They have made the blade that extends only 0.0013 inches past the shave plane of the razor, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. It shows up in your shave, but also just in terms of a cost-saving thing. Henson shaving is the way to go and a great investment. Like, you don't have to go to the store and buy it just pays for itself in a way that's just shocking to me.
It avoids just an insanely profit-seeking, I'll name them. Harry's. I had Harry's. I had so many blades from Harry's left over that it took me a long time to get to this.
Right.
And because I am like, I had a monthly subscription, and I just had them stacking up. And I'm so happy to have gotten through those, and the shave I get with Henson is just way better. And I'm not getting a subscription of like plastic shit.
Exactly. I mean, disparate ideas, and I am a right saying bought one, love it. We've heard this about this product like overwhelmingly from our audience. So with all that endorsement said, it's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/Sam to pick up the razor for you and use code SAM to get a free shave cream with your razor. Just make sure to add it to your cart. That's hensonshaving.com/Sam, HENSON, shaving.com/Sam, and use the code SAM to get a free shave cream with your razor, and just make sure to add it to your cart. All right, folks, quick break, and a word from another one of our sponsors, and then we will be playing our conversation that I had earlier this morning with Michelle Phelps.
Is it selfish or brilliantly anti-capitalist to gift your one true love something that also benefits you? When it's a bidet, everybody wins, because the gift of a clean booty keeps on giving for life. I want to thank Tushy for sponsoring this episode and also changing my bathroom practices forever. Right now, Tushy Bidet is dropping deep discounts on bidet life essentials that'll transform your bathroom habits and butt for life. Now's the time to back away from boring gifts and dirty habits to save on a luxury lifestyle upgrade you're going to use every day. Go to hellotushy.com/TMR to grab your deal before it's gone. The Tushy Bidet is super easy to look. We're not talking now. Some people have like thousands of dollars of toiletry that they've spent to get this. And take it from me, in the case of Tim Pool, when I dropped off my kids in the pool, it broke it. The Tushy Bidet attaches to your existing toilet. No need for additional plumbing. No need for additional electricity. Wash with a precise stream of fresh water that removes 99% of bacteria compared to wiping with toilet paper. That is, like, this is where, like, somehow civilization came back around. You would not, if you get your hands dirty, you don't just take a dry piece of paper and wipe it. You get water and you wash it off. And here's the thing about the Tushy Bidet. Installation is simple. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. Literally anybody can do it. It's also easy to use. You sit down, you do your business, you turn the knob right on the right for a refreshing stream of clean water. Once you're done, you turn off the knob, you simply pat dry with toilet paper. People who've made the switch to Tushy use up to 80% less TP, no more clogged toilets, save your money and your butt at the same time. For every Hello Tushy Bidet comes with a 30-day hassle-free return and 12-month warranty. If you've been waiting to upgrade your bathroom or grab the perfect gift for anybody on your list, now is the time. Honestly, I think I have a 2.0. I can't remember what I've had it for a long time. And people know this on the show, and it makes them uncomfortable of me to even talk about it. But it's fantastic. If you've never had a bidet experience, I am telling you, everywhere else you go is going to feel like you've stepped back in time. And super easy to install. If you can change your toilet seat, you can do this. Give the gift of practical luxury that benefits everyone in your household. Go to hellotushy.com/TMR now to grab your deal before it's gone. Don't forget to give us a shout out while you're there. Let them know we sent you. That's hellotushy.com/TMR for the best gift this holiday season. Honestly, it does make a great gift. Link in the podcast and YouTube description. Now back to Emma.
We are back, and we are joined now by Michelle S. Phelps, sociology professor at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, author of The Minneapolis Reckoning, Race, Violence, and the Politics of Policing in America. Michelle, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So can you talk a little bit about your process for this book? Because it's really fascinating. You started your ethnographic work on this prior to the killing of George Floyd in 2020. So how did that inform the rest of your research, having this pre-George Floyd data where you spoke to so many different residents in Minneapolis, and then after, obviously the seismic event?
Right. So I began this research around 2016, and that was after the police killing of Jamar Clark in Minneapolis. So it was certainly a similar moment in that there was a lot of attention around police violence, and particularly police violence that disproportionately impacted and killed Black men. And the research actually, there was a couple of different components. I was talking to organizers and folks who were trying to change policing, both inside and outside of the system. But I was also talking to neighborhood residents, particularly in North Minneapolis, which experiences the highest rates of police contact and police violence, to try and understand how were residents in the community making sense of this public conversation about what their lives were like, right? About what they were experiencing in their communities. And the project was supposed to wrap in 2019. And I have versions of the academic work where we're trying to explain why Minneapolis matters to a national audience. And then, of course, George Floyd was murdered. And what I realized in that moment was that all of the stories that I had collected in the years previous could help us to understand and map that moment of rage in the city. So why people went out onto the streets in such unprecedented numbers, but also why we get this declaration from a majority of the city council promising to end the Minneapolis Police Department. You actually couldn't understand that moment at Powderhorn Park without all of these years of buildup leading up to it.
So what did you find then? And I mean, there's so much there. It's a tapestry of speaking to people. But in terms of themes of the pre-2020 interviews, how would you characterize that for our audience?
Sure. I would say among the activists and organizers and people who are really leading the movement locally against police violence, the key theme was this shift towards police abolition, right? Really a disillusionment with the reform process. And it was that shift towards abolition that then creates the groundwork for what happens in summer 2020. But you could also see the seeds of what would become the failure of the charter amendment in Minneapolis that came out of that organizing, because what I was hearing from community members was a tension between the fear around police violence and the fears around community violence, and the desire to have somebody show up to respond to the really deep problems in community. And it was actually community members who I think were in some cases more able to explain how racism and anti-Blackness in particular were much bigger than policing, right? And they were able to see that there was all of this attention on policing and police violence, but that was as much a symptom as it was a cause of the problems in the community, and that the roots then of what needed to change went much, much deeper than simply changing policing.
And what was the relationship between police violence and community violence? How does that inform community violence, not just when police brutality, but say a lack of trust that's engendered with police departments that maybe makes community violence worse?
Exactly. Yeah. So the kind of core argument in the book is that we have to think about community violence and police violence in tandem. And there's a way in which those two things are linked, often from the political right, to say, oh, well, of course we have lethal police violence because look at the high rates of homicide in the community. And that is absolutely not the argument I make in the book. The argument I make in the book is that the way in which they're connected is that the same communities that are most at risk of police violence are the same communities that are most at risk of victimization in the community. And that matters not because it justifies police violence, but because that dual risk means that those communities have this ambivalent reliance on the police that make the politics of moving away from police really fraught, right? And that it is in fact both police violence and community violence that we have to solve simultaneously. It's not just that police violence impairs community trust, but that it's both of them are driven by the causes of inequality in our neighborhoods, and that is ultimately what we need to be talking about when we talk about police violence.
And that complexity, I think, created the real backlash that we're seeing really nationally, especially because there was an increase in crime during the pandemic. And in 2020 and in 2021, it created this causal relationship for people. And I would say it's a very convenient narrative for white suburbanites and people in corporations that wanted to blame their losses on crime or whatever. But there is still, like, the fact that it still had resonance with those communities, I think speaks to the complexity of it, and the fact that it was abandoned so quickly. Almost, it's almost like that complex dynamic was too much to take on in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd, and also like with the pandemic and the presidential election. It petered out a bit.
That's right. And I think, it's really notable how different the tone of the 2024 presidential election was in contrast to the 2020 election. And, people kept asking me, what are the consequences of a Harris presidency versus a Trump presidency for criminal justice reform? That's what reporters wanted to ask me. And my response kept being, this election is about a lot of things, but criminal justice reform and policing reform is not at the top of that list, right? It's not even on the radar anymore. And I think there is this sense that we can, in terms of the public conversation, that we can be talking about police violence or we can be talking about community violence. And there's sort of a ping-ponging of attention between the two. And what I was trying to do in the book was to say, if we want to build real solutions, we have to actually hold those tensions and hold that complexity in mind at the same time, and not have this constant pivoting of attention between one problem to the other, because they are in fact deeply interrelated. And, I have this graph in my book that shows the number of police officers in Minneapolis and the number of homicides over the past several decades. And what you can see is exactly what you said, right? Which was that in right up to the run up to the 2021 Charter Amendment Initiative, there was both a very real and profound and rapid increase in the risk of homicide in Minneapolis, and a profound drop in the number of officers, not because the department was defunded, but because those officers left in droves and the department wasn't able to hire and retain officers. And there was very much a narrative that those two things were causally connected, in that the drop in officers had produced this rise in homicide. And what we see, if you follow it out in 2020 and 2023, is that homicide rates come down as the pandemic recedes. And in fact, the number of officers continues to drop, but it doesn't have that same political resonance when the two things are dropping in tandem versus officers going down and homicides going up. So, there is some very complex relationship. I think police officers do have some impact on crime rates depending on how they're deployed, but it is modest and it is vastly dwarfed by all of the other social drivers of increases or decreases in victimization. So it's absolutely not the case that the police are the only variable that matters here.
Can you talk about the false causal relationship, or I guess flesh it out even more, between police presence, I guess, and reducing crime, right? Because as you're saying, that causal relationship is inferred, but not necessarily. But obviously, it's not borne out in terms of the data fully. Like the causal relationship is a very convenient narrative for police, and so like the fact that that's what came out of these past 4 years is a bit of a depressing moment, but it does just feel like something that was a convenient backlash narrative that kind of preserved and halted a lot of the reform movements throughout the country.
That's right. And you'll notice it's only when crime goes up, it's because we don't have enough police supports. And when crime goes down, it's because police have won. Right?
Yeah.
And in both cases, I think the answer is a lot of things are changing at once, including the police, but lots of other things. And I think, law enforcement in the country would have a lot to benefit from, taking a more sociological viewpoint that they can't solve all of these crises, right? And we shouldn't ask them to. We shouldn't ask them to solve crises caused by a lack of housing. We shouldn't ask them to solve crises caused by a lack of care for people with mental illness, right? There are all of these things that we ask the law enforcement to respond to that are really outside of their purview. So if we think about the first thing to say is that crime is a very amorphous concept that can mean lots of different things that we criminalize and that are sometimes, but often not, reported to the police and measured as crime per se. So that's the first piece, is that crime is this very murky category. The second thing is, what do police actually do? So police can be present on the street to, in theory, deter people from committing acts of harm. And police can also use the power of arrest, right? So they can physically remove people from the community for some period of time, depending on the court process and how it plays out. That's a really limited set of tools, right? Physical presence and arrest. It's not nothing, but it's a very limited set of tools. And if we think about the most serious kinds of crime, homicide in particular, that are the sort of the category of crime that I think we have the most consensus that we want police responding to, and that we want to see people, for instance, arrested and prosecuted for committing homicide. In those cases, our best causal estimates say that if you increase the number of police officers, you can modestly reduce the expected number of homicides, but you do so at a cost. And that cost is you wind up racking up a lot of people with low-level arrest and conviction records, which can have negative repercussions for them in terms of housing and employment, and ultimately destabilize those individuals and families. We also know that cities with the largest number of Black residents benefit the least from those homicide reductions and experience the brunt of that increase in low-level police contact. So the question for me is always not, do police reduce crime? To which I think the answer is, it's very complicated. The question to me is always, for every dollar we spend on police, what might we invest it in that might have similar or larger reductions in the kinds of negative outcomes that we care about? And that fundamentally was at the heart of the defund movement, and I think really got lost in the conversation after 2020.
And can you speak a little bit more broadly about Minneapolis's place in the police reform movement from the long, hot summer of the late 1960s to it basically being a bit of a laboratory for police reform for a while, and how that informed the moment that you research in your book?
Right. I talk about Minneapolis as a hidden bellwether, in that because it's in the Midwest, because it's a relatively small, mid-sized city, it is not on the radar of the national conversation in the way, say, a Los Angeles or a New York or even Chicago are. And yeah, what we can see is that for generations, going back to Hubert Humphrey, who was mayor of Minneapolis in the 1940s, there have been these waves of attempts towards progressive police reform, right? And trying to rein in police violence in the city, all the way up until to the mid 2010s, when Minneapolis was one of the pilot cities for an initiative that came out of the 21st Century Task Force on Policing under the Obama administration. And I think what that history did was not so much solve all the problems in policing, although I think it made at times incremental improvements. But what it did, I think, was really illustrate at the moment of the murder of George Floyd, which happened in such a unique set of circumstances, right? In broad daylight, without guns involved, this slow death that is like witnessed by a crowd of residents. And it was a really exceptional case in lots of ways. And the fact that Minneapolis had been the epicenter of these reform efforts, I think, was really part of what radicalized folks in summer 2020 to say, reform has failed. We need to try something else. And I think what comes out of that, and I think, again, coming back to the complexity, is that, I think in the here and now, we are going to have police departments. And so I think sometimes there's sort of a false narrative that gets pushed that left-leaning cities are actually the worst because we see the police violence in left-leaning cities. And that fuels this narrative that all police reform inevitably fails. And in fact, there's lots of cities that look a lot worse than Minneapolis. What happened in Minneapolis could have, in fact, happened anywhere. But what is unique about places like Minneapolis is that they have this robust infrastructure of activists and organizers and engaged residents who are willing to spotlight and call public attention on police violence, right? So it's not that this is unique to left-leaning places in terms of the police violence. What's unique is the public conversation about police violence.
Well, to be honest, when they say left-wing cities, they usually mean cities with a high concentration of minorities. That's the dog whistle that they're engaging in. But as you write, Minneapolis is a majority white city, right? I believe, and so that does, I think, add to the complexity that you describe. But in the aftermath, like the city council basically said, after the Minneapolis police precinct was burned, we're going to have to tear this all down. And it was not followed through, really. I mean, if you could just explain how that happened. But it was a moment of true radical politics for a second, at the very least.
Yes, I think that's the right way to say it. It was radical politics for a moment. And I think, so the way that it happens in that moment is that Minneapolis is on fire. There's massive protests happening every day. Those organizers and activists who increasingly, although not exclusively, have turned towards abolition are putting a ton of pressure on the mayor and the city council, ultimately writing the pledge that the city council members read on the stage of Powderhorn Park. It isn't the entirety of the Minneapolis City Council. So the entirety of the Minneapolis City Council will agree on a resolution that is not quite as strongly worded as what they read at Powderhorn Park. But it is a real radical moment of promising to begin the process of ending a police department. The challenge, I think, is that everybody that was on that stage that day had a different understanding of what it meant to begin the process of ending and what transformation or dismantling or abolishing or defunding the police meant to them in practice. And all of them knew that it was important to sort of take a stand in the moment, even if they felt ambivalent about the actual pledge, which again was not written by them, but sort of handed to them by organizers who had been putting a great deal of pressure on a very tired and very stressed city council. And so you get this moment that, blares headlines across the country that Minneapolis is set to abolish the police force. Ironically, it's the sort of far left and the far right that converge on that, right? The far left is saying, hey, they're going to abolish the police force. Look at this. And it's the far right saying they are going to abolish the police force. And the truth was always murkier. The truth was always that there was some consensus on city council, but not with the mayor, that we needed big, bold transformational changes. And nobody quite knew what those big, bold transformational changes would look like. And so The policy initiative that comes out of that is this ballot initiative that would have struck out all of the language on the Minneapolis Police Department in the city's charter, its governing documents, and written in a new Department of Public Safety that could include police officers. And so everything about that initiative would have depended on how it was implemented. It could have been nothing but a restructuring that put the police department under a new administrative body, or it could have been a real rethinking of how public safety operated in the city. It depended who was elected to city council and the power balance between the mayor and city council. And ultimately, the public did not vote, did not reach the 51% threshold it needed to pass the amendment. It did get 44% of the vote, for which, you know, for a ballot initiative on a non-election year associated with police abolition is actually a victory of sorts, right? And I think it didn't get majority support in part in North Minneapolis. And I think the reason was not that people had deep love for the MPD, but there was real fear about whether the city could and would stand up an alternative vision fast enough, particularly in the face of what was really stiff officer resistance, both rank and file, and the police chief who came out against it, who at the time was the first Black police chief in the city's history. So the politics of that charter amendment were really complicated.
Yeah, you know, I'm here in Brooklyn, right? And I do think about the election of Eric Adams around the same time, who is a African-American cop. And a lot of the support that he got was in communities of color further out in the Bronx and in Brooklyn and other places like that. So it fits into the complexity that you described. But you mentioned the mayor, Fry, repeatedly. He's so central in this story. Clearly, at the time, it appeared like he had national political ambitions. It seems like those are dead. But can you talk a bit about his role and even zooming out, the relationship between these Democratic mayors and police departments and how that really does, in my view, I think that sowed distrust and why someone like Kamala Harris lost ground in big cities in blue states. And I don't know, that's a theory I'm working on, but your thoughts there, Michelle.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, if we go back to summer 2021, so what's distinct about a mayor versus city council members is that the mayor has to be, or it doesn't have to be, but the mayor is elected by the city population as a whole. And so that means that the districts that vote at higher rates disproportionately control the mayor's office, whereas the representatives, of course, are more neighborhood based. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that the center of gravity on the city council will always skew to the left of the mayor. It sort of depends on how those district lines are drawn and sort of what's happening within each of them. But what it does mean is that there will be members of city council, if not a majority of city council, that are politically to the left of the mayor, because you need a more centrist candidate typically to get the folks that vote at the highest rates, which are typically the kind of wealthiest, whitest neighborhoods in the southwestern pockets of the city, which I should note, going back to our previous conversation, those were the neighborhoods that voted at the highest levels and that were most staunchly opposed to the charter initiative. So I don't want to blame the charter initiative falsely on North Minneapolis. In fact, the staunchest opposition was in the whitest, wealthiest neighborhoods, but it was ambivalently received in North Minneapolis, which I think is telling. So the mayor made it really clear that he did not support any kind of defunding of the police. In fact, he was running a re-election campaign in 2021 that largely relied on his standing behind the police chief, including quite literally, like on his campaign flyers, it's like images of him standing behind the police chief at press conferences. And that was really central to his re-election. And I think it highlights that even though in left-leaning Democratic stronghold cities, that there is still a lot of support for the police, both this complex, ambivalent support in the communities hardest hit by community violence, but also white Democrats who back the blue because they see law enforcement as fundamentally fair and just, even after years of BLM organizing. And so Democratic mayors have always had to walk this tightrope where they say, we will have the police, we will have safety in our neighborhoods, but we will also rein in police violence. And that is fundamentally always going to be a harder compromise to try and balance than the right that can say, no, we're just cracking skulls, right? We'll have policing and they'll crack some skulls.
Right. And what was the role of business associations, if at all, in killing the police reform? Because here in New York City, I truly do believe that like this anti-homeless panic is largely driven by restaurant associations and real estate developers that want some sort of, pristine look for the people to come into New York and go to Times Square like it's Disneyland or something like that, as opposed to making it a livable city. I know it's a different dynamic in a city like Minneapolis, but that's a part of this anti-police reform movement that I don't think gets discussed enough.
That's right. And there was certainly some of that in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a much smaller city, but it is compared to New York. But it does have the sort of entertainment district that is at the heart of the state, right? And so we have, just to be a Minneapolis booster for a minute, we have a huge number of theater seats and concert venues, and much of that is concentrated downtown. And it is set up so that the people from the suburbs can commute into downtown, and making the perception that downtown Minneapolis is safe for those suburbanites is really important to city finances, because so much is driven by downtown. So it's a much smaller version of the Times Square problem, but that's absolutely there. I would say those business leaders, there is a downtown a business council that did come out in opposition to the charter amendment. They were relatively quiet publicly, but they were certainly part of the coalition that was standing behind the mayor and pushing back against the initiative.
Lastly, what do you feel that the accountability that Chauvin at least got in terms of going to jail and being convicted, do you think that made a difference? Or what's your view on how that affected the Minneapolis and the people there?
Sure. I wrestle with this in the book. I think, I think that it was a victory, but a very shallow victory, that somebody like Derek Chauvin was successfully prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to serve quite a long prison sentence. I am not somebody who thinks generally that long prison sentences are a good thing. I think prisons are largely inhumane places that we warehouse folks, and long prison sentences do very little good. But a world in which that many, many people are sentenced to prison for much lesser offenses, I think the fact that we saw a white police officer face that level of, I won't say accountability, but of punishment, I think was really meaningful. It was meaningful to the family. It was meaningful to city residents. But it also did, as abolitionists were right to note, it also did in some ways try to exonerate the department, right? By saying, this is a bad exemplar. This was bad policing in action. This was not how policing operates, in ways that I think then made it a little bit harder to push for those broader systemic changes.
Well, really appreciate your time today. Michelle S. Phelps, sociology professor at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and the book is called The Minneapolis Reckoning: Race, Violence, and the Politics of Policing in America. We will put a link to that wherever you're listening to or watching this down below. Thanks so much, Michelle. We are back. Just wanted to note that we didn't cut off our last guest there. Her camera froze, Michelle's, right at the end of the interview. So the tech gods waited for the interview to be over to mess with us. But we are back, by the way. And right now we are joined by Gabriel Hetland, associate professor of sociology at University of Albany, author of Democracy on the Ground, Local Politics in Latin America's Left return, whose piece in The Nation is entitled "This Solar Panel Kills Fascists." Gabriel, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about the New York Build Public Renewables Act and why you feel it's so significant in both the fight against climate change and putting renewables in our energy grid, but also in beating back fascism.
Absolutely. We're in a really tough moment for the climate. I mean, we've just elected Donald Trump, who has called climate change a hoax, who's threatening to roll back all sorts of climate legislation, ending offshore wind, and just doing tremendous damage to global climate sort of goals and decarbonization. So that means that doing everything we can at any other level, including the state level, is very important. So the Build Public Renewables Act, which is one of the most ambitious pieces of climate legislation at the state level, and specifically is in New York State, I think is really important generally, but particularly important right now. The act promises to cut New York's fossil fuel emissions significantly, getting to 70% renewable energy by 2030 and then 100% by 2040. That's established in previous legislation, but the Build Public Renewables Act has tools that should make that much more possible than it would have been otherwise. And I think equally importantly, we're facing a crisis electorally. The Democrats are in some degree of disarray. They have lost massive amounts of working class voters across racial and ethnic lines, and they need to figure out a way to win those voters back. I think that legislation like the Build Public Renewables Act, which is not just a piece of climate legislation, but it's progressive and redistributive. It promises to build or provide for 25,000 green union jobs. It has credits for low income and moderate income New Yorkers in the form of energy refunds. And it just is exactly the model I think that the Democrats should be using for sort of pivoting the party away from Wall Street, away from Silicon Valley, away from Liz Cheney, and towards working class voters that they need to be winning back all over the country.
I mean, this really is the Green New Deal on the state level without the Green New Deal label, where it's focused on creating union jobs and making our energy grid more robust and cleaner. But it also has the pro-worker elements that you described, pro-union elements, and it would be something that would help out the consumer with the pricing of their energy bills. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yes, it has a lot of really great stuff. So in terms of union jobs, I mean, the legislation, the Build Public Renewables Act, which was passed in May 2023, so it was passed about a year and a half ago, after failing, I believe, twice in the legislature before that. It has language written by the state's AFL-CIO providing what organizers have called sort of gold standard labor provisions. It has prevailing wage agreements and other labor project agreements so that it would provide union labor for every single project that the New York Power Authority, which is the main sort of state entity in charge of implementing the Build Public Renewables Act, any of the projects that they were engaged in would have to have these very high standard labor agreements. It also provides $25 million a year in training funds to take fossil fuel workers and retrain them for work in the green energy sector. It provides funds as well to bring marginalized communities into the green energy sector. And then it has something called the REACH program. I believe it's a Renewable Energy Community Help Act, something like that. I may be getting the acronym a little bit wrong, but that would provide credits for low and moderate income New Yorkers. Organizers from the Public Power New York Coalition, which is one of the main environmental advocacy groups that's sort of been pushing for the law and played a really key role in getting it passed, has wanted those credits to be 50% of energy bills. So New Yorkers are facing huge energy costs. Anybody who lives anywhere in the state has seen their energy costs just skyrocket in recent years. And there's geopolitical reasons for that. There's also price gouging. There's all sorts of things. So this would provide some badly needed relief for low energy consumers. There's some other measures in the law that are also, I think, really important, especially for racialized communities in New York City. So there's 11 peaker plants, which are natural gas powered plants that are particularly active in peak energy demand periods, and they're located in New York City, I think one maybe in Long Island. And those are predominantly in Black and brown communities. And the law says that those have to be closed by 2030, provided that there can be renewable energy sources to compensate for the lost energy that the peaker plants would have provided. And that's, places like the South Bronx, known as Asthma Alley, where there's incredibly high rates of asthma amongst children, are suffering because of the peaker plants and other reasons as well. So there's a lot of really good stuff in the legislation, but there are some challenges as well in terms of implementing it.
And I want to get to those challenges in a second, but if you could just talk about making our utilities public and transferring not just from energy sources that are polluting the environment, but transferring away from private energy dominating the marketplace. Like, is this a step in that direction that is encouraging for you? The fact that this legislation is, we can talk about the status of it, but at the very least, it's further along and has a real chance to become law.
Yeah, and it's already law. So the question is sort of how to implement it. The public part, I think you pointed to, Emma, is crucial. It's so exciting that the private sector, first of all, they're not doing their job. They're not meeting the legal requirements of, there's a 2019 piece of legislation, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, that established the goals of 70% renewables by 2030 and 100% by 2040. The private sector is nowhere near that. I think we're somewhere close to like 30%, roughly right now. And we're supposed to get to 70% in, roughly 5 years. So public institutions that are not primarily motivated by profit can play a much bigger role. And there's some great literature out there. There's a book by Brett Christophers that came out with Verso earlier this year called The Price is Wrong. And he really establishes that renewable energy, especially in the electricity sector, is not profitable. I mean, the profit margins are like 5, 6, 7%. Right. When interest rates are 7%, it doesn't make any sense. Just, put your money in the bank. Don't invest in, low profit renewable energy. So the idea of the energy transition taking place through the private sector primarily hasn't been shown to be effective. So I think that just from a climate point of view, just from a sort of feasibility point of view, the public sector needs to be involved. But it's also exciting because, any listener of the Majority Report will know that having private control over it gives at least the possibility for more democratic input, for more democratic control, for more labor unions to be involved, for grassroots coalitions, for citizens suffering from asthma, suffering from high energy bills. Private companies, as we know very well, are pretty immune from pressure. They just say, shut up, and they don't really listen. But the public entities have to listen in a way that the private sector doesn't. So I think that that's one of the most important aspects of the law. It doesn't guarantee that it'll be fully successful. It doesn't take care of all the problems, but it's a really important piece of it. And it also gets to a question that AOC has talked about. She said, we don't want to replace oil barons with solar barons. So we don't want to just transition away from an oligarchy based on fossil fuels to an oligarchy based on wind and solar. We want to transform the economy in a way that benefits ordinary citizens, benefits workers, benefits the poorest amongst us.
And it's just such a superior way to approach this versus Biden did a lot of good things, but legislatively, the climate stuff that was passed was a lot of tax credits and incentives and didn't have the, I think, guardrails that this kind of legislation would have, both in terms of incentivizing energy production in going into the public sector, but also as it relates to labor. And your point about how you can have democratic input into a public utility in the way that you couldn't with a private corporation that's only beholden to its stockholders and to or shareholders, I should say, is really key, because this is we've been talking about healthcare and because of the killing of the United Healthcare CEO. Essentials like your energy for your apartment or your home, healthcare, essentials for you to maintain a standard of living and for you to live a good life. These should not be in the private hands where they are completely siloed away from the input of people who aren't in the boardroom, essentially.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you should not have to be rich to be able to have electricity. You should not have to be rich to, have these basic sort of healthcare and utilities. All of these things are absolutely sort of fundamental. And so I think that having, a degree of public control, and there's some really concrete examples of that, which are intentional and built into the law. So it was an amazing coalition of progressive organizers, a lot of Democratic Socialists of America, DSA elected officials who were really behind the law, pushing the law in Albany, helping to get it passed. And they made sure that there was opportunities for public input. And so the New York Power Authority just released a draft plan in October of the sort of plan to implement the Build Public Renewables Act. And one of the things that they did was they had 12 hearings around the state. One of them was virtual, where there was hundreds of people who showed up and gave comments, a lot of them pretty critical of what the plan actually was. And there was also opportunities for online comments. And the Public Power New York Coalition got about 5,000, which initially the Power Authority wasn't even sort of counting, but they had some pushback. So because of the law, because of the way it was written, but especially because it's public, they were able to build these things in. And healthcare, I've had crazy stories just like everybody else, including with United Healthcare. I mean, some really frustrating stuff. And, all I do is get on the phone and say, I'm so upset and you got to do this and that. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll give you a consultant. We'll give you this and that. But there's no public collective forum. So this law was really designed to provide for that sort of democratic space so that they have to listen. And I think that's a really exciting piece of it, because this is literally democratizing energy in all sorts of ways, on the consumption side, on the production side, and on the sort of process side. So it's a really important thing, I think.
Absolutely. And so in terms of headwinds from people in power that may not be excited about the way that this transition is going to go down, or may try to present obstacles, the New York Power Authority, what has been their reaction? And do you see any hurdles that we're going to have to overcome to make sure that this law is implemented in a good faith manner?
Yeah, absolutely. So the New York Power Authority, to start with, is led by Justin Driscoll, who as late as a year ago was a registered Republican. In 2022, he publicly stated his opposition to the Build Public Renewables Act. Some people have told me that happened before the Inflation Reduction Act happened. So I don't know if his views would have changed after that. But he's on record as opposing the law that he is now tasked with implementing. He actually was voted down by the state Senate. So democratically, he shouldn't even be the head. But the governor used a loophole to push his nomination through, or to push his sort of confirmation through anyway. So there's a lot of questions about him at the top of the agency implementing this law. The draft plan that the New York Power Authority released in October has some good features. I mean, it talks about closing the peaker plants. It provides for 3.5 gigawatts of renewable energy, which is a okay start, but organizers have said we need 15 gigawatts of renewable energy just to get to the goal. So it's not worth getting into the technical weeds, but they say if we're actually going to meet our goals, which are important for New York State, but also for demonstrating that states can make a real contribution to fighting climate change, we need much more. We need much more ambition. So there's people in the New York Power Authority who I think are really serious, who are trying to do work, but they haven't stepped up. They haven't actually shown the ambition to come up with a truly ambitious plan that meets the moment. I mean, anyone who's in New York City and watching this will know that there was a fire in Prospect Park, which is in the middle of Brooklyn, a couple of weeks ago. My son, I live in Brooklyn, and my son goes there every Monday. It's crazy, to think that these things are happening. There's fires in the West. There's fires all over the place. So the climate crisis is here right now. We need to be as ambitious as possible. And thus far, while the New York Power Authority has shown some important positive moves, and they should be commended for that, they haven't been as ambitious as they need to be to meet reality. And this is something that, Zohran Mamdani, who's a socialist elected in Albany and the DSA candidate for New York City, told me in an interview a couple weeks ago. He said, they're not meeting the reality of this moment. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that.
I think so, too. Gabriel Hetland, associate professor at the University of Albany. You can read his piece in The Nation, This Solar Panel Kills Fascists, but also his book, Democracy on the Ground, Local Politics in Latin America's Left Turn. Gabriel, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on.
With that, folks, we're going to wrap up the free part of this program, head into the fun part of the program, where we will be taking your calls and reading your IMs. No Brandon today, but check out the Discourse. He is streaming on YouTube now. And do we have the link to that, by the way, Bradley? We have it down in the description, I would imagine. But if you want to hear more Brandon, if you want to hear more of him just kind of speaking his mind without any of us trying to jump in or whatever, because sometimes it gets a little bit crowded, you should head over to the Discourse, and it's at but the E is a 3, Discourse on YouTube. It's always fun I was listening to his stream the other day. He's doing a great job, and I always love to hear Brandon's thoughts. So check out the Discourse. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Left Reckoning Tuesday night, we had Danny Bessner on talking about what's going on in Syria. We had a world war situation, what the prospects for that are long term. And then we had a Sheikh Sadiq, national co-chair of DSA, talking about what's next for the organization in the wake of Trump's victory. So,
do you think that it's interesting that like Nazi Germany, Israel is bombing a bunch of their neighboring countries and trying to take their territory, and that the reaction in the United States has been like, no, that's really cool. And as opposed to like when, I don't know, I understand that Germany's plans were more ambitious and broader and more, I don't know.
I don't know, it's taken over the entire Arab Peninsula in Egypt. Is that not ambitious? Because perhaps I think that's what Zionists want to do. Liberal Zionists that are published in American media notwithstanding. Somebody just reported Shabbat is the first to settle in Syria now. And I remember hearing a conversation about like maybe we shouldn't protest certain groups. I'm sorry, if you're a Jewish group, but also participating in Zionist expansion, you deserve a protest. And the people within the organization that are fighting against Zionism, to the extent that they are there, they should be the ones empowered and listened to, and to reform any of these organizations against the nationalism that is perverting them in a sick way that is making them hated. Like this stuff needs to be addressed now. Sorry, I'm off track. What are we actually talking about?
I forgot. We're plugging the shows, your shows.
But yeah, we had DSA on talking about that, and also speaking of back to Israel, remember what South Africa was doing in the final years of apartheid?
Yep.
All the belligerents
lashing out, starting wars and conflicts all over the southern part of that continent.
And I mean, America, right before the Civil War, what were we doing? Invading Mexico to try to let off a little bit of pressure. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, these settler colonial nations and turn to a sort of imperialism. Because also Israel, as Ilan Pappes pointed out, and Catalyst had a good piece a couple issues ago about the political economy of Israel, and has more and more been, okay, there's more inequality, but you can have a decent life if you go live in one of these settlements
right.
that we are taking over. So yeah, Patreon. Anyway, that patreon.com/Left Reckoning for that stuff.
And on ESVN today, Bradley and I will be giving our picks against the spread. So check it out, youtube.com/ESVN show. Let's bring in Binder, but before we see him here, before we do, let's just make sure that we plug our merch, because as a reminder, we have the limited edition until the end of the year EmMajority Report hats. Apparently they're flying off the virtual shelves is what we're hearing. You can go to shop.majorityreportradio.com. You can get the limited edition EmMajority Report baseball hat in charcoal, which is a great color for a hat. It goes with everything. And also, if you wanted those 20th anniversary mugs, they are back in stock. So check that out. Limited edition as well. You can pre-order them at shop.majorityreportradio.com. We have Matt Binder?
Yes, we do. Binder, let me go to you here. Actually, before I get Binder on, Bradley, if you could navigate to the Left Reckoning store, but I have a couple things to show here.
Right.
So I'm going to open up this bag. Brand new, just got to me this morning. Left Reckoning.
Oh my God. You had it in shirt form too?
Yep.
I was really loving the hats.
There's the fence cutter shirt there, and also I got my hat in, which is Yellow. There's a black one too, if you don't want to be so bold. Some people said this one looks a little bit like Curious George guy, but I like that. Let me just put this on.
All right. Those are the golf hats, right? With the rope around the front. These are very in style right now. Woo! That font is nice. That's nice.
So yeah, if you go to the store here, leftreckoning.com/store, you can get access to all of that stuff. So including the new fence cutter t-shirt, but I'll bring in Binder now.
Hey, Matt Binder.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well. What's happening on your shows?
First of all, I just want to say that those Left Reckoning merch is very nice.
Very nice.
Wow. And also, by the way, the guy who wears the yellow hat in Curious George is aptly named the man in the yellow hat, just for future reference.
Yes.
That's what his name is, actually.
Makes it easy.
Yeah.
What's happening on your shows? Yeah.
So tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time is Leftist Mafia. I was recently on the podcast Western Kabuki, so definitely go check that out. It's the podcast that's co-hosted by June, aka Juniper, who's very well known and very well liked online. Also, I don't know when it's coming out, and I'm hoping they put it all up. But I was invited on a panel show for like a sort of like, I think it's called like TRT World or something like that. I've been on there before, and I had no idea
Turkish,
who was going to be on. Yes, and I had no idea who was going to be on the panel with me until he showed up, and I was on a panel with Nick Adams, the alpha male guy.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yes.
Basically performance artist.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was very funny. I had a good time going at him. I'll let you all know when that's up, and hopefully it's uncut. If I knew who I was going to be on with, I would have set it up so I was recording on my end too. But it was so last minute. I was like, oh my God, look who it is.
You should have tried to out alpha him.
Right.
Oh well, to give you guys a taste of what happened. So they asked us about it was like about Trump embracing podcasts and things like that, and how Barron Trump apparently was who convinced him to do these shows or whatever. And so he was going on about how great Barron Trump is, and so I called him out on, we know nothing about this kid. And so he tried to like act like, no, he's not being ridiculous. He wouldn't like actually support Barron Trump. And then I showed him all the times he said he would basically die for Barron Trump right now if Barron Trump was to become president.
It's such an indictment on Trump's fail sons that like they have to project all of their fantasies onto his 18-year-old kid who I don't think has ever spoken in public once.
Right. I got nothing to say about the guy, the kid. He's done nothing publicly whatsoever. I don't know. No one knows, no one except his family or people who know him in real life know anything about this kid.
Yeah, but they're monarchical. The fan base for like they.
He's the once and future king.
Right. It's just so weird. Anyway, that sounds really fun. I'm looking forward to watching that, Binder. All right, guys, we'll head into the fun half now. The number is 646-257-3920. We will see you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, whoa. Look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
Wow.
sushi.
I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind.
So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
Had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job.
Tour.
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Willy Wonka tour.
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered a tour?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion.
real thing.
That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, Glenn.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Tour,
Deluded.
sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right.
Rangers and Knicks doing great.
Now shut up. I don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's
No.
one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best. Violet.
Tour,
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't binge. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
Sorry,
she
finance.
wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
We are back, folks. It is the fun half. Opening up the phone lines, 646-257-3920. Nicola, I don't mean to spam, but I haven't asked for this in a while. When are we getting Tour Sushi and Poker with the Boys merch? Probably a good idea.
I feel like you got to make like a chopstick set. I mean, you gotta.
Well, I just can't even.
You gotta go full. You have to go full with it. You know, you just embrace the theme of it.
Shawis, hi, Amar. 20 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with acid reflux disease and was prescribed medication to deal with the pain and other symptoms. Her insurance at the time was Anthem Blue Cross, and they refused to pay for the prescription, so she had to settle with much less effective over-the-counter options, and it was legitimately debilitating on some days to deal with the pain. This isn't the absolutely worst horror story with private health insurance, but I feel like almost everyone has stories like this. It's an inherently evil institution.
And that's what's so horrifying about it is the low hum of just cruelty that this system inflicts on people. Daniel Tutt, a writer, what radicalized me against the U.S. health system? And I think we need to make as much time as possible for these sorts of stories. Tutt writes, witnessing my mother have to pauperize herself in order to become eligible for Medicaid. To qualify, you have to relinquish any assets you may have accrued, and you basically have to accept marginal and extremely low-paid work. The program is designed to exacerbate existing resentments within the working class because the threshold for eligibility are only inclusive for the extreme poor. This leads to jealousies amongst the lower end of the working class that has the political effect of narrowing the possibility of solidarity around shared labor-based objectives. All this is construed by design as an objective of the neoliberal state. It is meant to fragment the working class and to forge relations of paternalistic dependency on the state amongst the extreme poor. This shatters their political consciousness by rerouting their rage with this system onto one another. So we have to be severe in this moment and be honest that this is not about just like disagreements among two people grasping the different part of the elephant and some people describing the trunk and some people describing the tail. What you have with people who are paid to write arguments minimizing the brutality and cruelty and meaninglessness other than profit of the private healthcare system, they're lying. They are lying for that system because that system can only exist based on fictions. the fiction that they're going to do something efficient, that they're going to do somehow lead to better care. They don't. The only care they lead to better is better care of the really rich people who own stock or are big parts of the company. And this is a fight. This is not a disagreement.
El Knipsion says, Emma, thank you for turning me and my girlfriend onto Detroiters. Good. It's so great. Let's pull up. We'll do that late the Luigi thing of the let's pull that up just to build
What's
off
the Luigi thing? What are you guys planning? You're gonna do the Luigi thing.
Ob says, congrats to the Majority Report YouTube channel surpassing 1 billion video views the other day. We did?
Oh wow.
Whoa. Hey.
Nice.
Seth the Lit PhD says, is your merch union made? The answer is yes. Chapo and Hassan are able to work with union shops. Would love to support MR and unions. Yes, our merch is all union made. All right, let's do this then. So, News Nation, I guess, went to the Pennsylvania prison where Luigi Mangione, the alleged killer of the healthcare CEO, is being warehoused. And first, though, before we get to that, that's just a little teaser, because we'll have some information for you. But this was Jesse Waters just a few days ago speculating about what it would be like for Luigi in prison.
And good, he's got it. Now, he's a prep school kid. He's politically connected in Maryland.
He's ready for prison?
I don't think anyone's ready, Brian. Maybe you are, Brian, in a different way. But this guy's not ready. He's way too soft. He's going to get annihilated on the inside, and good. If he's not going to get the death penalty, maybe someone will do him justice behind bars. That's all I have to say about that.
You should stop there.
Right. And
that was too much for even Judge Janine, his implication that Luigi was so soft he would get assaulted sexually in prison.
Did he not see the shirtless pics of this guy on social that he had posted on social media? This guy is ripped. I don't think this guy has to worry about anything in prison, honestly.
He's trying to say that because he went to an Ivy League school and because he went to prep school that he's soft.
Look up the schools that Jesse Waters went to when he was a teenager, by the way. They're all available on Wikipedia. Very funny aerial photos of some of these places.
And by the way, Jesse Waters, I know you lost that fight to Ryan Grimm. So let's be real about who's soft and who's hard here. But now that we have that, let's test that theory. So News Nation went. They're outside of the prison where he's being held in Pennsylvania. And